What are you gonna do now?
Greetings, and welcome to our newest edition of Word on the Street. I'm your host, Derek Wright, and I am very excited about our show tonight. What we're going to do different tonight from what we normally do is we're going to have a roundtable discussion regarding the police shootings throughout the country. But what we're also going to do different is, opposed to having a room full of civilians, I have a room full of retired and active law enforcement officers from throughout New York State. I have the utmost respect for my guests tonight, and what we will do, what I'd like to do first is introduce my guests. If you would introduce yourself, please.
My name is Eric Johansson. I'm the Chief of Police here in the city of Peekskill.
I'm Kurt Harris, retired crime scene guy, I guess. Yeah.
Mike Abruzzi, I'm a retired New York City detective.
My name is Derek Wright. I've also served 20 years in the New York City Police Department and retired as a first grade detective.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Martinez. I'm retired sergeant from the 3O Squad.
Hi, I'm Vinny Beckles. I'm retired first grade detective, New York City.
Okay, guys, let's get right into this. What we won't do tonight is we won't really speak too harshly against the cops out there on the street, because that's the school we come from. That's not what we do. But we all have to admit that something serious is going wrong today with the kind of shootings, with the kind of incidents happening across the country. What do you think we need to do to bridge that gap between the police and community? Chief, I'll start with you.
Well, I mean, it's incumbent on both sides. The police have to engage their community, and the community has to understand what their police are there for. To have a gap is counterproductive to whatever's going on. So it's always important to have a police agency or police departments that get right into the community, develop relationships, build bonds instead of walls, and really seek to have those relationships established and make them long-lasting.
I agree. I think we all can agree that respect is something that seems to have gone out the window over the last couple of decades. Respect on behalf of civilians to police, and sometimes respect going from the police to civilians. So do we think it's training? Do we think it's just this generation of cops? What would you say, Mr. Harris?
It's an amalgam of all that. It's part of the culture, the me first sort of mentality, the millennials, instant gratification, absent any explanation. It's also training. And I emphasize training because it's the hallmark of a professional law enforcement officer. The training has to become a bit more salient with the culture that we're dealing with. And I say that because it was insular, in the past. We had law enforcement officers teaching new police officers how to do the job. I think we have to morph into a more varied approach to teaching, and that involves pulling people from other expertise. I'm speaking specifically of the Innocence Project. There are individuals that have particular experiences dealing with wrongfully incarcerated individuals that may be able to offer nuggets of wisdom to newly assigned police officers. We can talk about folks that are involved in civil rights programs and so on. We can have them involved in the training process. New York City, as a matter of fact, broke ground, and this was about 7 years ago with an academy class They had a number of people come in from the other civil rights groups to conduct a class. But it has to be a bit more involved than that. It can't be just one class. It can't be just one seminar. They have to be thoroughly infused in the education process of newly assigned police officers. That's my belief.
Great point. If you look at the situation today, it appears as though they have the blind leading the blind. When we all came on the job, it was 20, 30-year guys in the office that would pull you to the side, hey kid, this is what you're doing wrong, and would get us on the right track. Now you don't seem to have those guys in precincts anymore because most old times after 20 years, most guys are retiring. So how can we combat that? What do you think?
I think what you said originally was about respect, and you and I have had this conversation in private about, when we were raised, you wouldn't think of talking back to an adult. You had respect for an adult, and that is completely lost in our culture today, on both sides of the fence, wherever you want to look at it, however you want to look at it. When you have parents with little children in school who are acting out in school, and the parents are blaming the teacher, so I mean, this goes with them throughout their life, and to get, if you want to talk about the police, I recently had an experience in a place in northwestern New Jersey. Something happened, won't get completely into it, but afterwards my wife was like, why were you acting that way? Why would, what was wrong with, why did you have such a problem with those cops? And I said, well, and somebody else said to me from the job, said, oh, they just don't know what they're doing. And I'm like, nah, it's not really that. It's just inexperience. They don't have the experience we had. And I'm not, trying to make us out to be some kind of heroes or anything like that, but New York City was a very, very different place then. Like you said, we're active all the time. Young cops aren't that active anymore. When my son got assigned to the Bronx, everybody's like, oh my God, he's going to the Bronx. I went and I looked at the statistics for the precinct that he was going to. That was supposedly the horrible precinct that he was going to. There was like 23 homicides. I chuckled to put my head on the bed and pillow and went to sleep. He's going to be fine.
Right. Right. Okay.
It's a lot to do with inexperience.
Right. Mostly.
Right. That they get their training, but then there's no place to use it once they get out on the street.
Well, if you go into the inner cities and you speak to most Black and Latino people, their anger is that cops can be involved in shootings. And from what we see on TV, from the angle we see it would appear as though the cop is wrong. But after the grand jury and the trial, cops are set free. You can say that from the Rodney King case down to the Sean Bell case, to the Diallo case. What about that? Does that hold any credence?
It sure does, simply because the media will only show you what the media wants to show you. It's easy for someone to look at an incident and judge based on what they're watching on television. Whereas, you know what, the media is only going to show you what it wants to show you. It doesn't show you from the beginning. And referring to what the commissioner and my colleagues have said, when you have a system that is broken under your leadership and you don't fix the system, then the system isn't broken, the leadership is. And based on that, that's where the leaders have to come in and say, where are we failing with these cops that are going out there? Is it the training? Just like you said, you mentioned, we used to have old-timers taking on the youngers under their wings. Recently, all these old-timers have retired. They don't want anything to do with the job anymore. So now you have these young, I have two nieces and a nephew that are on the job. And I'm going to be honest, it's different than when we were on the job. Totally different.
You can't have a field training officer with 3 years on the job.
Exactly.
Right, exactly.
You
That's
can't
not-
train.
Yeah,
You can't fix the system with someone who needs fixing himself.
Inexperience.
Inexperience.
That's it.
And
Inexperience.
it's a system that is broken, and I think that those that are in the leadership have to take a step back and figure out, what can I do to fix this system? I'm honest. I have two nieces and my nephew. They're young, 4-0, 4-1, 4-4, busy precincts. And I'm honest as an aunt, because I remember what I went through, what my family went through. I always have to tell them, you make it home.
Right.
You know, however you make it, just please make it home, because time is the time from when we were on the job
Right.
to now, it's totally different. We had a little more respect, the community had a little bit more respect towards the cops, actually feared the cops and, you know, did whatever not to. Now, it's crazy. Now it's crazy. There's
Well,
no
the cops,
respect.
We have to build that respect up. And you bring up the media, and you know there's a penchant for people when they hear something on television or see it in writing that they believe it. So
Exactly.
if the media is framing it in one way, they're going to believe whatever
Exactly.
channel they're watching.
Exactly.
And however they say it, that's what people are going to believe. So it's up to the police to go out and say, hey, wait, this is who we
Exactly.
are.
That's
Get
right.
into the community. Show that you're not just a man in a blue uniform or a woman in a blue uniform, but that you're a father, you're a mother, you're an aunt, you're a football coach, you're a baseball coach. You have the same problems that they have. Humanize yourself.
Exactly.
And
They'll
that's
sh-
important.
They'll show you what they want you to see.
But we have to
brings
show
it-
them who we are too. It's the same
you
thing.
have, and what the problem is that the media will show you, but it will never show people that were protesting actually going in the cops and giving them a hug, or the cops, you know, protecting the people after the execution of those 5 cops in Dallas. The same people that were protesting, that were being protested against after the incident happened,
Very small
were the
part of
very
that
same
story.
people that were protecting the people that were protesting against them.
And one of the women in that situation in Dallas, she talked about how a police officer shielded her,
Exactly.
got on top of her and her child, and that was just a very small part of it.
A
I mean, if you
very
didn't happen to
small
be
part.
watching television at that time, you missed that.
That's
that
the
never
problem.
came out.
The
That
media,
didn't-
the media is the worst.
They
Yeah,
are.
but I understand everything that we're saying, and we're all cops, and I feel that as well.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to admit that there are a couple of incidents going around the country where cops are just a little bit too loose on the trigger. I worked with most of you guys 30 years ago, in the 80s. We were doing search warrants. Thousands of people, tens of thousands of people were arrested. Tens of thousands of kilos of drugs taken off the street. Guns taken off the street by the busload. I can only remember 2 shootings in our office, and that was a 5-year period. I mean, I know it's a different time, but they had just as many guns back then on the street, if not more. Were we that much in control of our trigger finger? Or are these guys today that much looser?
I think we were a lot older. I think at the time that we were in narcotics, we were fully grown men.
I was 22.
But you
I was 22 years old.
undercover.
You lived a life also.
You lived a life.
Yeah.
You come out of
Right.
you come
Think
out
about
of
where you
Brooklyn.
came from.
You
Right,
know,
right.
When we were doing things that the experience of where we worked at just transferred over into what the unit we dealt with. So we weren't really scared in a lot of these communities. We walked in communities because we knew the communities. So
Right.
as far as going into buildings or dealing with somebody, we gave a little bit. We had a little extra that we could, you know, we seen the situation before. We didn't have to get riled up. We knew what we were doing. And to go back to what the chief said, our community policing is a real joke now. Because if you remember how community policing was back in the day, was the beat cop. They don't do that because they were afraid of corruption. So the beat cop is not really a beat cop. He's the guy that just comes out every once in a while, says hello, and then walks out. We got to get back to the cops that work a certain area all the time and know everybody. I know Johnny Jones. I know Vinnie Johnson. I know everybody. A lot less problems would happen if we had real beat cops. But the department, on the other hand, worried about corruption, worried about somebody getting lost in the sauce, so they don't do it. They tell you to do it in community policing, but it's not really community policing.
That's an interesting point. But what I was thinking was, when did departments start going bad? When did the hiring situation started going horribly wrong? I believe it started happening, especially in the NYPD, when they start requiring 64 credits to become a cop. Now, the example I use for another teaching, lecturing circuit that we do, you got a guy, he goes to NYU. He gets a 4-year degree as a biologist, right? He can't find a job as a biologist after he gets his degree. So what does he do to get out of his mother's basement in Long Island? He takes the test to become a New York City police officer, and he scores a 99.
Right.
Okay, he's first in the academy. So now he lived in Long Island all his life. You know, he lived a pretty privileged life. Doesn't really have too many black and Hispanic friends. Lives in a very affluent neighborhood out there. Now he's in the middle of Harlem, right? Never really been in a fist fight. So they have gun belts now in the NYPD that's similar to what Batman has.
Exactly.
He has everything on his gun belt.
crazy.
Right?
It
And
is.
you're supposed to, I mean, this is what I remember learning. You're supposed to utilize everything else on that gun belt before you go to that weapon. That's not the way it is today.
I was told, and this is what I told my son, and I learned it even more when I was an undercover in narcotics. Your most powerful weapon is your mouth.
Exactly.
My father was a trooper. He told me when I got in the police academy, he said, Eric, don't rush to pull your gun. You pull your gun out, you're a one-handed man.
Right.
Yeah?
Because
true.
If you pull it out, I mean, you have to use it.
have
And
to
it
use
certainly shouldn't be out in every situation. We know that. We definitely know that. But,
Yeah.
you know,
That's a last resort.
But you'll be hard pressed these days not to turn on the television and see cop shoots person, and you look at what they're showing you because because nobody sees all the facts on TV. But you'll look at it and you'll go, wow, this doesn't seem like
See,
this
you know,
should
it
have
goes
happened.
back to what you were originally saying about the credits that were required, and some folks who specialized in a certain academic major, you know, not being able to find work. So what we're doing is we're bringing folks on that don't have the community sort of like flavor, if you will, you know, in order to assess a situation, okay, and the nuances. Because communication is not just voice communication.
Right.
It's also listening.
Right.
It's also watching,
Yes.
you know. And there are a myriad of sort of things that go on during an interaction. Now, if a person isn't savvy enough to be able to pick up on these physical cues or vocal cues, then he's going to certainly step into an area that is more injurious to both himself and to the individual that he's interacting with. So this is what, you know, we have to get back to. We have to get back to enriching the individuals that share that culture that they're policing, along with slow down on the police culture, because the police culture is it's acidic, okay? It turns, you know, once idealized or idealistic police officers into cynics, you know?
Yeah, that's a big danger too, to become a hater.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
A big danger.
Yeah.
as-
So how do
as a
we get
cop.
around that?
Well, you know, I don't. I mean, it. Like earlier, what we were talking about, you know, senior officers, you know, showing the younger guys, or how to speak to people. I mean, that's the biggest thing, and I can't imagine the next generation of texters.
Right.
They don't interact with people. They don't look at one another.
Right.
You know, I'm sure you're the same way I am. You shake someone's hand. As you're meeting that person, you're looking at them in the face, you're shaking their hand, and within the first 5 seconds, you go like, okay, this person's all right. Like, you know, and that's from years of doing your job. And I was giggling when you were describing that individual from NYU. I was that guy, but without the NYU.
Right.
You know, I came from a lily white part of Queens, you know, and the first place I went to was the Lower East Side. I was like, oh my God, what am I doing here? What am I doing here? And I remember an old timer saying to me, it's okay to be scared, but don't be afraid. And I kind of like, I never understood what that meant until when I became an undercover.
Buying drugs. There you go.
Right, because I was scared, but I wasn't afraid because of guys like Vinny and guys like Kurt. I knew they were right outside.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I had that confidence that, okay, if something goes bad, they're going to be there for me. And it was an eye-opener for me. Again, coming from my background. You know, I wasn't the guy that grew up in Bushwick. You know what I mean?
Right.
I wasn't that guy.
The interaction between people is, but like Mike said, it's very important, because sometimes we don't see the problem or the problem comes so quickly. In case point, the gentleman with the cigarettes, that was the loose cigarettes.
Garner,
Right.
Eric Garner.
Garner, who's if you look at the beginning of the film, like I said, we don't see it all.
Right.
The police officer was very patient.
Right.
They were talking to him.
Right.
And the problem insists when he said, "I'm not being arrested.
Right. I'm not going to.
I'm not going."
Right.
Now, me and Derek always discussed that. What is the police officer supposed to do?
Right.
Is he supposed to say, "Okay, you're not going. We'll come
Right.
back tomorrow, and
Right.
we'll discuss it tomorrow"? They're not going to do that. We're not. That's
Right.
not how the police department works.
Right.
In any place,
Right.
if you're under arrest, you're under arrest.
Comply.
Comply. You know,
Right.
and if you don't comply, not saying that we did right, but things like that escalate
It gets
into
bad.
bad things.
Right.
Well, Vinny, let me ask you a question. I'm sorry.
Please,
may
please,
I?
no
You know,
question.
with regard to compliance, compliance is a very nebulous sort of term.
Right.
It means different things to different people.
Right.
Submission, you know, in many cases can be viewed as, passive-aggressive behavior.
Right.
Okay. In cases where we had, compliance, submission, anything that a reasonable person, and this is the key,
Right.
what a reasonable person will derive from that, you
Right.
know. And we still have these, these shootings. There's something else at work here.
Of course. And I'm just using that particular example
Right.
for that particular reason.
Incident, yeah.
What you're saying is exactly right. We have people who've said, "Anything you want, officer, I'll do anything. When
Right.
we get on the ground, you want me to stand up?"
Right.
And still have been hurt.
Right.
That's a totally different thing. That person has to be looked at
Right.
for that incident.
So, but since you're going to bring that up, let's talk about Charles Kinsley, who was in Miami. He was the mental health worker
Yes.
who had the autistic man
Yeah.
with him, and the officers approached him. I think they got a 911 call, man with a gun, and they approached. Mr. Kinsley put his hands up, lay on the ground. He laid on the ground. He was speaking very calmly to the police, and he still got shot. And he supposedly asked the cop, "Well, why'd you shoot me?" And the cop said, "I don't know."
And I believe, you know what? And I believe that officer, when he said, "I don't know." I think it was something that's in him that made him very afraid, and he reacted.
He perceived something. He saw something. He
and
thought.
and he fired his weapon.
I mean, your mind can
shouldn't-
play. Your
he-
mind can play tricks
Right.
on you. It happens.
He should not be on the job because
Right.
of those reasons.
Right.
Because something like that may happen to him again. But I believe what he
Exactly.
said, that I don't know why he did it. I don't think he did it maliciously, to kill this guy on the ground. I think he saw something, got nervous, and pulled the trigger.
But you bring up a good point about him not being on the job, and that's part of the problem too.
Yes.
Right.
Especially in this part of the country. I mean,
Right.
it's get your 20 in and get your pension.
Right.
Some people, they should get on, and 2 or 3 years into it, you can recognize
Yes, they
that's
should
going
not
to be
be-
a long 17 years till this guy gets to 20.
Yes.
Maybe you need to find something else for him to
Exactly.
do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you get a small job like mine,
Right.
there's nowhere to put him.
Right.
And to get rid of them,
Right.
it doesn't work
You're
because
exactly
the
right,
unions
Chief.
have civil service protection in the unions. But there are people that the job just isn't for them, and they don't recognize that.
And it goes back to the screening. These young cops are coming in, and you know what? They're probably coming in with a desire to do this. I really want to do this. This is my desire. But the screening, okay, what makes you think that you're going to be able to do this? I mean, like you said, you go through the psychological process, and really these aren't psychiatrists like you were saying before. They were just, they're not like, like, okay, you know what, draw a house, okay?
Right, right, yeah,
What does that have to do with anything?
Right,
You know what I'm
right,
saying?
right.
And that's why I'm saying that the system is broken. They have to find a way to fix the system, because once you fix the system, where I mean, you could blame the cops. The cops, they're wrong. They're wrong. Do we have cops that are wrong? Absolutely. But you got to go up. Like they usually say, the thing rolls downhill. You know how stuff roll downhill. You got to go back uphill and figure out, okay, why did this happen under your leadership? What are you going to do now to fix this? Okay, how about getting the leaders to go into a command and say, you know what, today I'm gonna ride with you. I wanna see what you guys are going through. I'm gonna put on my vest, and you know what, I don't need my Secret Service to be with me. Today I'm gonna be your backup, I'm gonna be your partner. And figure out, what are these cops dealing with? Take a step back and look at what these cops are dealing with, and look at what the community is dealing with. You should be able, as a leader to figure out, okay, this is what's wrong in this command. This is what's wrong. But nobody wants to take the blame. Everyone wants to sit back in their little office and point fingers.
You're right. One of the things that we do here in Peekskill is so much smaller than the NYPD, but it's still kind of the same thing. We're like
It's
a
a police
precinct.
department.
It's a police department.
You do what
We
you have to
our-
do.
We have
That's
our
right.
issues.
Right.
But when we hire somebody, we own them.
That's
Like I
right.
said, you just can't get rid of them. So now we have to train them.
Exactly.
We have to get them acclimated into the community. If they're not from here, they've got to learn about here. One of the things we ask in the hiring, what do you know about Peekskill? And if somebody comes in, I don't know, I just Googled it and figured out how to get here. Well, you know what? You're not the kind of person we're looking for.
Exactly.
But one of the things we do is we've brought our police officers, especially our younger ones, but all of them, we've brought them into our schools, namely our high school. We went from our SRO programs where you had one cop in a school, he was there or she was there for the entire year, and they got to know the kids, and the kids got to know him or her, and that was great. But that was just one cop. Now we developed a program in collaboration with our school district called Real Talk. It's kind of like this. We bring a cop into the classroom, and he puts it all out there on the table, or she puts it on the table, tells that student body who they are and what they're all about, and at the same time, they give it back to them. They get this back and forth, and they develop a relationship, and they learn that they're real people. Because I'll tell you,
Exactly.
you bring up fear and being afraid. I know cops that are scared.
Oh, yeah.
They've got you've got to break down that barrier and be a part of that community. Just they're craving it. Our community craves our police officers being a part of it. We have
That
to do
works
it.
twofold because those
Absolutely.
same kids grow up to be adults in this community and will remember.
That's
"Oh,
right.
that's the police officer Harris. I remember
That's
him.
right.
And he was real nice to us, and he taught me about this.
Right.
And something goes wrong, he'll be the first one
That's
to call
right.
for you because he knows you.
And we were laughing before. You guys were talking about how we've had some serious crimes here in Peekskill, and you
Right.
guys know about it. And you're
Right.
like, man, how do you catch
Right
people
away.
so quick? Because we have strong bonds in our community.
That's
Because
right.
our officers know who they're dealing with. They have relationships with people that they can talk to,
correct.
and we have a community that doesn't tolerate that kind of behavior. And we're all in it together, and we treat it that way.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
but
awesome.
to play the devil's advocate, there still are people out there that are watching these things on TV, watching the news around the country, and they're saying, if a cop's trying to pull me over on the road, I'm just going to drive until I see people or I see somebody I feel safe around because, after looking at the Philandro Castile in Minnesota, it seemed as though that guy was doing everything the officer told him to do. He got lit up anyway. So a lot of people now are a little bit more leery of pulling over and listening to what a cop has to say because they don't know if they're going to get ripped out the car for something minor. So how do we combat that other
And
than
that's-
trying
and
to
that's big-
give them knowledge?
That's big on the media, because the media is showing, like we always talk about this incident where and that's a little bit of knowledge where a guy gets pulled over, and he's asked by the officer to step out of his car, and then the officer says, "Show me your license and registration," and he turns to get back in the car. Now the officer thinks
Yes.
that he
Right. Yes.
and opens fires on him.
Right.
He misses him,
Right.
but he opens fire to him because his license was
in the
Now,
car.
is that training? That's training.
And scared.
That's training and scared because he did the whole procedure was wrong, making him get out the car without asking for his license registration
Right.
first, and then when he saw him get in the car, instead of saying something, he just pulled the
Okay,
trigger.
we're going to have to wrap it up here because we're out now 30 minutes already, believe it or not. But we're going to have a second segment to this, which we're going to come back to because this is a very interesting conversation and it needs to be told and heard in front of our public. Okay, so thank you for tuning in tonight. We will be back with the second half of this conversation. You guys have a great night.